Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar series, the GDN Conversation Series. My name is Jelger de Boer. I am the immediate past president of the GDN network. And in my day job, I work at DUO, which is the executive agency for the Department of Education in the Netherlands. And I'm here replacing our executive director, Joanne Douglas, who you have seen in previous webinars. We have been doing this webinar series now for a few months to engage our network into the work that some of our network partners have been doing over the past or are planning to do into the future. So I would just advise you to stay tuned, check our website and our LinkedIn so that you can see when new webinars are scheduled. And today I am here and I'm joined by Dr. Martin Hall so that we can have a discussion or a conversation about the impact of AI on credential assessment and recognition, and about how that can maybe reshape practices for the future. Normally I ask the speakers to introduce themselves a little and tell us a little bit about their work and who they are. But for this session, I thought maybe it's appropriate if I ask ChatGPT to tell me something about Professor Martin Hall. So this is maybe immediately an opportunity to see if they get it right and where it might do better. So, but first, welcome, Martin. I'm just going to introduce you shortly to our audience, right? So, Professor Martin Hall is an emeritus professor at the University of Cape Town, the Graduate School of Business. He is a leading voice at the intersection of higher education, digital innovation, and technology-enabled learning. He served as Vice Chancellor of the University of Salford in the UK and Deputy Vice Chancellor of UCT. His work focuses on educational transformation, digital credentialing, and the impact of AI on assessment and recognition. He advises organizations such as the Advanced Secure Technologies and JISC and contributes to international networks such as the Groningen Declaration Network and the UNESCO Global Convention on Higher Education. Martin Hall combines policy insights, leadership experience, and technological expertise, making him an authoritative speaker on the future of AI, qualifications, and global mobility. Well, there you go. Welcome, Dr. Martin Hall.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So how did it do?
I was listening to that with trepidation since you hadn't told me what it said beforehand. It did reasonably well. Of course, it obliterated the first entire half of my life because I'm trained as an archaeologist and started off as an archaeologist. And to some extent, I still consider myself an archaeologist because, you know, a hand axe is a tool and artificial intelligence is a tool. So there's a conceptual relationship. The trick, as many on the call will probably know, is that if you hear something that you don't like, what you need to do is get very firm with AI and tell them in no uncertain terms that it's got it wrong. And then usually, if you're using something like Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, it'll come back and apologize immediately, which is very gratifying.
I should have tried that, yes, because we've had the pleasure to meet in Cape Town last June when quite large delegation of the GDN board was visiting Sakwa for a seminar and also to prepare for next year's annual meeting. And you spoke at that occasion about your work, and that's also why I knew that you had started in archaeology. So for me, it was funny to see that maybe this was also because my prompt wasn't written well enough. I'm sure we'll get into that
we will.
A bit more. But anyway, very nice to have you here. I would just like to say to our audience that if you have any questions during our conversation, feel free to put them into the Q&A or chat, so that we can address them at the end of the webinar. But first, maybe it's an interesting start to see if you could tell me a little bit about what was it that brought you to work on digital credentialing and artificial intelligence?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, the artificial intelligence bit, and that is that, as you mentioned in the introduction, I've been involved in digital innovation in education now for a long time, really from about the mid-1990s when we first had a project. I was involved, funded generously by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation of the United States, and we called it the Multimedia Education Group. And the reason we called that is we had the first computers with video cards. Before that, there were no video cards. I mean, I started off with an Apple II a very long time ago, which had 28K of capacity. And when I teach my students now, just to introduce what's happened in a lifetime, I calculated that in order to equal the processing power of my iPhone, and I think I've got an iPhone 13, you would now need 900,000 Apple IIs lined up, 900,000. And this gives you just a sense of this exponential change. So I've been tracking the effect of digital innovation on education now for 30 years, since the mid-1990s. And so obviously, you know, what happened in November 2022 with the release of ChatGPT, you know, obviously artificial intelligence has been around a long time before that, but the general availability of these applications is we've just seen this extraordinary transformation everywhere. A lot for the good, a lot for the bad. The technology is always neutral. Okay, that's one of my fundamental principles. The World Wide Web, you know, back in the early 90s, we thought we were all going to live in redwood forests and love everybody. And then from 1994, it became commercial. And now, of course, 90% of the traffic's on the dark web. So there's always a good side, always a bad side. And so it's logical for me from that point of view. From digital credentialing, that was actually accidental. I was doing some work for the University of Cape Town, and we wanted to introduce digital credentials for our short courses because it made more sense. We weren't interested in the security aspect of it, but we were interested in the digital credentialing aspect. And I really got hooked on that when I got involved in it. And so now I'm lucky enough to work with an outfit called Advanced Secure Technologies, which is headquartered in Cardiff in Wales. And we also have a Southern African branch now. And in fact, we now provide digital credentialing for half of all South Africa's universities, as well as a lot of universities in the UK. And I've become very interested in this because, of course, secure digital credentialing also has the good, but then it counters the bad. I mean, the good is that with secure credentialing, you are much more able to share your qualification, which is great for student mobility, international student mobility, everything that the GDN stands for. Equally, of course, it counters the bad, which is the escalating prevalence of degree fraud everywhere, which itself is enabled by artificial intelligence. So that's the battle we face, good and the bad.
I see it. And just taking a little step back, you started in archaeology, as we've mentioned. So maybe you can just go in a little bit into how that would connect to your current work, because that's fascinating to me. I remember you talking about this in Cape Town. So maybe you can just take our audience a little bit along your trip.
Sure. Archaeology is the study of technology. It's as simple as that. Material technology. It's the study of the material world and technology. So, you know, one of the multiple definitions of what it means to be a human being is the ability to make a tool, to make a machine. A hand axe is a machine. And in being able to do that using a mental template, which is learned through communication, is one of the things that sets humanity apart. So it's all about technology. What's happened now, which I think is absolutely fascinating, and it's a philosophical issue that we should start thinking about. You know, tools and machines have always been an extension of the human ability to survive in the world. I mean, you know, we for everything from guns to technology to railways, all of these things, the machinery that we use is an extension of our ability to use our hands and thought and create what we create. Artificial intelligence is the same. But the interesting thing about artificial intelligence is if you think of a tool almost as a prothesis to the human body, artificial intelligence is a prothesis or a tool to think with. Now, we've never had that before. And that's the thing that's setting it apart.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting point of view. Yeah. Just going into a little bit, because I know you've also had experience at JISC in the
Yes.
UK, which is one of our GDN partners.
Oh, good, good,
And
good.
we in GDN, of course, are very much focused not just on digital credentialing and enabling the cross-border mobility of students, et cetera, but over years, we have also grown into looking more at learner mobility and lifelong learning, and how can we help learners be mobile, not just cross borders, but also on the social ladder. How can you use some partial credentials or micro credentials or whatever you want to call it to advance yourself and help the labor market fulfill the needs of the population. So I'm just curious to hear from you how that work at for JISC that you've done, how that steered your how do you say that, your course
Yeah.
towards the trajectory where you are now.
Yeah, JISC is a great organization and a great partner to have in the GDN. And we started off in JISC by simply providing a high-speed internet network at a time when you had different networks. Now, of course, that's not necessary. So what JISC does is that it provides digital services for almost every university in Britain, and with a lot of international connections as well. And I was privileged to chair the board for JISC for a while, at a time when we were moving it away from being a government body, government-supported body, to being independent, which it now is. And what I learned from that is exactly that point you've just made about the interconnectedness of everything. And we became very interested in how to facilitate student mobility. And by student mobility, I mean everything from mobility from one university to another, which of course increasingly happens when people move from their first university to a different university for their graduate level qualifications, but also, of course, mobility between countries and internationally. And that is where I really think digital credentialing really comes in, because, of course, it's far, far easier to share a digital credential, and it's far, far easier to verify one, and it's far easier to replace one. And that provides a virtue of insurance. You know, we talk a lot as well, of course, widening access and the risk of the digital divide. And digital credentialing helps with that. One of the striking things, the challenges we had, which I hope we would never have again, is right back, more than 10 years ago now, in the earlier stages of the war in Syria, we saw a huge exodus of refugees, many of whom came through where you are, the Netherlands, went particularly to Germany. But what had happened was that every university in Syria had ceased to function, and many of those universities, their legacy registries, which held all the records, had been destroyed in the war. So a lot of these well-qualified people arrived as refugees in countries like Germany, but had no way of verifying their qualifications. And I remember I was in the UK at the time, and I remember that we did a lot of work on establishing bursary opportunities for Syrian refugees to actually go to universities in Britain. But they couldn't take up the position because they couldn't satisfy the requirements to demonstrate their previous academic credentials, which I thought was a real tragedy. So again, I know that GDN is very interested in the issue of support for refugees and long has been. Digital credentialing is a key part of that, because it gives you that control. And then we move on to new innovations, which GDN is also involved in issues such as, for instance, issuer identity registries, where you have the GDN project in partnership with Credential Engine. Now, what's important about that is, of course, you can have a digital credential, but how do you know that the organization issue it isn't actually fraudulent? So you need to have that registry as well. And I think we're really moving into this field now to provide access for whoever you are, and to provide that's assurance that all the work that you put into gaining a qualification is actually going to be recognized through credentialing.
Yeah, very well said. And this very much ties into our notion at GDN that we want to build a network of networks,
yes,
and a network of trusted partners who that are either a trustworthy institution or individual, with a trustworthy credential to share with the rest of the world.
And as you go into that, you're going to find that artificial intelligence helps you more and more to do that in all sorts of ways.
Well, that's a perfect bridge to my next question, because today we are focusing on the impact that AI is having on credential practices. There's a huge and ever-growing literature on the way in which AI is reshaping the world. Of course, we see it all every day around us in our personal and professional life. So my question to you would be, how can we approach this in a way that helps us understand our options for specific areas of interest, so such as credential assessment and recognition? So how do we approach this enormous development in AI when it comes to credential assessment and recognition?
Yeah. Well, let's carry on with the dichotomy between the positives and the negatives of AI, and let's start with the positives. Okay, so first of all, one of the reasons why AI will become essential to you in the GDN and in other networks like the GDN is that it'll help you with fundamental back office functions. So the biggest contribution among the professions that AI is making so far is in back office functions. If you look at health sciences, for example, and there's been a lot of studies, a lot of work on AI in health sciences. Health sciences is not replacing doctors. What it's actually doing is giving doctors more time with patients, because it's helping with the back office functions of administration by automating them in all sorts of clever ways. It's also helping enormously, of course, with drug discovery. It's also helping with diagnosis. So that's the benchmark. You know, it doesn't replace it. It helps you to focus more. Now, if you think about international student mobility, and anybody who's worked as an administrator in a university will in this area will know this. You can have very well established principles for accepting students at your university from any country in the world, but before you can accept them and make student mobility a reality, you've got to be able to equate the qualifications they've got with the qualifications that you require. Now, of course, the thing about universities is that almost every university has a different system of grading. Okay, a different system of grading. I work a lot with American students who visit Cape Town. I run short courses, for example, for New York Stern University in the UK. When I first did this, you know, and I was pretty naive about it. You know, I looked at the students. I thought, oh, they've done really well. This is a great sort of submission. Let me think what I'll give them. Oh, well, I think they've done pretty well. I'll give them 74%. I started giving my American students 74%. I had them weeping. I had them calling their mothers back home. 74% was disgraceful. You know, so the point basically is they all had to have A's. And so it's in some of my American universities now, it's not whether or not you get an A, it's whether you get an A plus, an A plus plus, an A minus, an A minus plus, or whatever. Now, the administrator has got to equate all of that. They've got to put it together and they've got to recognize them. And we call that credit accumulation and transfer. And, you know, in legacy institutions have a lot of international students. You'll have somebody in the registrar's office who does nothing but try and work out the equivalence of all these postgraduate students moving around the world. AI is going to take that away from you. That's a classic back office function where you can program an AI application, and these will be specialized tools that you don't have to do it yourself. These are tools that you will actually, you know, you'll buy from a provider, and the application will be able to know every single qualification that's offered at every single university, recognized as a university. And I mean, there are around about, I don't know, there are about 200,000 or so universities in the world as a whole. It'll have all of that information available to it in its training set, and it will be able to give you equivalence as a printed out report. So that's going to massively facilitate student mobility, both physical mobility, and of course, the ability of students to register online for courses in other countries as well. So that's going to really change that. That's an example of the good. An example of the bad is that one of the things that's happened with the massive increase in AI is that degree fraud is increasing massively as well. Now, just to give you an example of that, in the first year after the release of ChatGPT, which in other words will be in 2023, the incidence of phishing attacks using email increased by over 1,000%. And the reason for that was AI, if you get most of the phishing emails that we're used to are so bizarre that you laugh before you press delete, right? Because they've got your name wrong. It's so obviously a scam, you just press delete and off it goes. What AI is doing is it's personalizing and localizing. So just as you managed to get a profile of me before you introduced this, if I was trying to send a phishing email to you to extract from you your credential details so I could fraudulently represent them, I would also do exactly the same back to you, what you did to me today. I'd get a profile of you. I'd find out a little bit more, and I'd also basically probably use it to find out the sort of area you live in. And so like you said to me, well, we met in Cape Town last year. I would know to say, oh, well, we met in Groningen last year. And I'd know a little bit about you and how's your work going, with your government department. That email is going to be much, much more convincing, and you're more likely to fall for the scam. That's the one thing.
I'm already falling for it.
There you go. You see. And then the other thing is that at the same time, one thing AI is very good at is actually producing fraudulent documents. Now, we all know about fake images, fake videos, which sometimes have terrible consequences. Well, a traditional degree certificate is an image. And, using AI will now create copies of legitimate credentials from leading universities that you will not know, you cannot tell that they are fakes, whereas most traditional fakes are so badly done that you know straight away. So on the bad side, what we're going to see, and we are seeing, is a massive increase in fraud. And this is, of course, why secure digital credentialing and the ability to verify is going to be so important in the future.
Yeah, this reminds me of a session we had at a previous GDN annual meeting where a colleague from HED, the higher education degree database that are now part of JISC, that session was called Everybody Lies. But I guess now you can have AI do the lying for you.
Exactly right. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why at Advanced Secure Technologies we're actually working with HED. So we have a partnership with HED, and we help them with their verification service, so that you can actually get past the lying and verify. And of course, what you should expect from a verification service these days is that anybody with your permission can instantly verify your credential on their phone. That's the standard that you should expect in the service that you have. So in other words, you haven't got to wait 2.5 weeks for a reply from a verification agency. The standard now you should expect of a verification service is, first of all, verification can only happen if the credential holder has given their permission. And secondly, that credential should be instantly verifiable using a phone back to the issuing organization or a secure alternative. And we're seeing that kind of standard come in again in the work that's going on. I'm thinking again about Credential Engine, their partnership with DCC at the moment, where they're looking at different forms of registration. And of course, we have the World Wide Web Consortium standard on digital credentials. So we're getting some good international standards of what this stuff looks like. And I think in the next few years, it'll be expected of every university that they have digital credentials and a secure digital verification service. I think that will become a new quality standard for the sector.
Yeah. That's of course is one of the main topics that we discuss in our network, and try to help organizations or sometimes even governments that are on their way there, because not everybody is moving at the same pace, of course, to see how we can help them to establish a good verifiable digital credentialing database or system where you can help your learners use their credentials in a verifiable way across the globe. So very recognizable topic for sure. Maybe this triggers a question to me that dovetails into this notion of maybe a bit of inequality, a digital inequality, where not every institution, or sometimes even every government, is in the same position in their digital transformation. And I guess the same can be said for AI and the use of AI. So one of the worries I have, and I've also seen articulated by others, is that whilst we in the more developed countries are able to prepare very well for some of the threats of AI, how do we make sure that you don't leave others behind in this battle against
Yes,
digital fraud? You
I
have
think
any
that is.
thoughts on that?
Yes, I have actually, and that's a very big issue for us here in South Africa, because one of the unfortunate characteristics of South Africa today is that we are, in terms of household income, we are the most unequal country in the world. It's a legacy from our past, and we have very high levels of inequality. But on the other hand, one of the striking things about working in this environment in South Africa, and this is the case in many other countries in Africa, um, however poor you are, the one thing that you have is some form of smartphone. And the reason for that is you have to, because your banking is going to be on smartphones. For instance, Kenya has been a leader in establishing mobile banking, where you, in fact, can get access to cash without actually having a formal bank account, something that people in a country like the Netherlands, for example, would find, well, what's the point? We have a bank. And so that is crucial for us. And so the trick is to start testing these new applications of AI, not in countries like the Netherlands or the United States so much, but in countries like South Africa and other countries in Africa, because then you can make sure that you've got applications that can be accessed on a mobile phone, for example, rather than depending on a computer or a laptop. You've also have got solutions that have low bandwidth requirements, which is quite feasible, because of course the cost of data, which you probably wouldn't think twice about in the Netherlands, but the average cost per gigabyte of mobile data in Africa is twice the cost that it is in Europe, calibrated in European currencies.
Right.
So you've got the poorest countries paying the most for digital data. So the trick here is to make sure that your applications can be used on mobile phones and can be used in a situation where the cost of data is important. Now, that's not going to solve the digital divide in itself, but the global prevalence of using some form of smartphone is increasing rapidly all the time. I mean, it's very, very different now to what it was 5 or 10 years ago. So we can get these mobile solutions. And it goes back to what I was saying about how the standard for verifying a digital credential should be that it can be verified instantly using any smartphone. That's the test. And if you can do that, you're beginning to get over that digital divide. On top of that, of course, you can build far more sophisticated uses of AI. They're not mutually exclusive at all. But when it comes to making sure that we are providing the right baseline services for students and graduates to help in their mobility, help them verify their qualifications, help them to produce their qualifications on demand, which in turn helps them with employability. That is contributing to more economic equality, contributing to more access, dealing with the digital divide.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. Maybe we can go to a question in the Q&A, because I think this may actually be a very good next step after your remarks about how to use AI in your back office processes, so to say. Somebody in the audience is saying that they've seen a platform from a predatory provider that's being sold as a solution, of course, and that doesn't check for period of study. When it does accreditation, it misses visual clues on the documents, and it doesn't calculate GPA correctly. So the question is, how do evaluators make sure that these tools limitations are made very public?
Yeah.
Is this something that
yes.
you could?
Yes, I could. It is important. So you have a problem. I've been doing some work on that right at the moment. In actual fact, we have a South African Qualifications Authority conference coming up, and I'm giving a presentation there on this. We need more devices for institutions, particularly universities, but also government departments, to evaluate AI applications rather than taking them on trust. And this, I think, is relevant to the question, because you see, it's just like degree fraud. You get mirror institutions which are fraudulent. Well, you're going to get mirror applications that are fraudulent, because that's, first of all, one of the ways of selling a substandard product, but also more sinister, it could well be a way that you extract information for the purposes of fraud. So if your verification application is itself fraudulent, you've got a problem. Now, that to some extent takes us back to the sort of work of the GDM in partnership with Credential Engine for issuer identity registries. But what we lack at the moment is developed policies in universities and colleges to make decisions about which software and which applications to use. Now, there's no reason why they shouldn't have those frameworks. They do have exactly those frameworks, for instance, on deciding which learning management system to adopt, or which student information system to adopt. But at the moment, we don't have those protocols, and I think this is long overdue. And basically, institutions that are providers of qualifications, or institutions or organizations that provide networks for students under student mobility, should only be using applications and services which have in themselves some way be verified for their quality and their reliability. And I think there's a phrase which I really like in the language of security at the moment, which is this concept of what's called zero trust architecture. Now, in our security protocols online, we've moved, there are at least 5 stages now of security in making sure that you make sure your credentials are secure. The one thing, of course, that we all know is that a password is useless. I mean, I don't have to remind an audience such as this one that the most common password in Europe by far is password, right? Followed in the United States, interestingly enough, they don't have password as their most common password. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as their most common password. So password protects nothing. And when you get to a certain stage where you are wrapping security around every individual qualification, usually by putting it on a blockchain application or something like that, this becomes what we call zero trust architecture. So what you need in this world of AI is you need a zero trust mentality. And to help you to navigate that, because of course we are mere mortals, we can't ourselves evaluate this trust. We need trusted institutions who can provide those evaluations for us. GDN is one of them, but every organization that is an issuer of qualification should in fact be the one that's establishing trust in these various applications that are available. So it's a good question and a good thing to be very aware of.
Yeah, and it's reminds me of whenever you think maybe I have a virus on my computer and you start Googling for a good solution against a virus, it's typically a new virus that you're downloading onto your computer, right?
Exactly right. Exactly.
So we have the GDN has been working over the past few years on a trust hub, which is application you could say that you can use through our website to see whom we as a GDN network see as trusted partners. And this makes me think that maybe we should start thinking about also adding some of these AI solutions that we know to be trusted, to add them to the trust hub so that people can actually verify if they are working with a trusted partner.
I would strongly encourage that. I would strongly encourage that. I think GDN's got some very powerful networks going on with people who really have expertise in this area. And you've got those connections. And I think offering that as a service so that your members of your network can know which applications have been verified as safe. It's rather like the standards that are issued by the World Wide Web Consortium, which are very good. And in fact, I'm quite sure that you could work in partnership with an organization like W3C, because they are going to help you to establish what their standards should be.
Good. I'm making a note because now I have homework. Good.
Right.
Very good. All right. So let's see. So I think we've discussed a bit of the good and a bit of the bad, but there might be more to say about either of those, because this is a topic with a lot of layers, I would say. So let's see how if you have any thoughts or ideas, and I know you have, about how can we now see opportunities to use AI in our advantage in the field of the credential evaluation, maybe in a way a step further than just smoothing our back office procedures, because I'm sure there's more potential there that we could tap into. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think there is. One of the things I think that can really help us in using AI is curriculum design, is course design itself. Because remember, we are in the business here of developing learning pathways. I feel quite strongly that we need a significant change in a lot of the organizing principles of the way that we teach in universities. What's happened since I think, and I think, the aftermath of the COVID lockdown has had a huge impact on that. So of course, the COVID lockdown across the world created an unexpected but a very powerful laboratory for experimenting with new ways of teaching and learning online. I remember very clearly that, in 2019, early 2020, I think there were about four or five learning management systems or conferencing systems in place. Now there must be 30, 40, or 50 choices because people have launched all sorts of new interesting ways of learning online. So one of the consequences of that was a massive acceleration in very interesting new ways of learning. So we've seen the rise since the lockdown of corporate training. If you look at the aspirations of IBM, if you look at the aspirations of Apple, the aspirations of Google, they are talking about training hundreds of thousands of people in these new fields and these new innovations. They are basically stealing the higher education institutions' breakfast, so to speak, because the problem with our conventional ways things, and I speak now, this is a self-criticism as an ex-vice chancellor of a university and a senior administrator, we take far too long to introduce new innovative courses. It can take, many universities still are not offering a professional master's in how to use AI, for example, because it usually takes about 5 years to set up a new master's degree. And this only happened in 2022. And yet there's a huge need for people who have to get to grips with the way AI is changing our world to get access to professional training. And then they're not turning to universities, they're turning away to corporate trainers. And that's impacting universities in their enrollment numbers in all sorts of ways. So because of that, I think we need new approaches to learning design. And one of the things we need are much more flexible learning pathways. Now, flexible learning pathways are a great idea, but they're a nightmare to implement with traditional curriculum planning. Universities are very bad at forming consortia among themselves. They're very bad at letting their architecture interact with each other. I don't know much about higher education in the Netherlands, but I can tell you that in Britain, where there are roughly 120 universities, okay, there are more rule sets for awarding degrees than there are universities. So 130 different systems of recognizing, grading, and whatever. Now, that makes it extremely difficult for universities to collaborate as consortia inside countries, let alone internationally. Yeah. And one of the things AI is going to be very good at is developing coherent curricula that are adjusted to what particular students want. So it's not just, if we think about the mission of the GDN, it's not just about connecting everybody up. It's about connecting everybody up so that they can develop more meaningful pathways through education. And that's what we want. But they are very difficult to design. And so I think AI is going to play a big role in curriculum design in the future. It can already very effectively do what a learning designer does. So that the profession, I think the profession of being a learning designer is going to turn out to be one of the most short-lived professions in the history of humanity, because learning designer as a profession really took off during COVID, right?
Yeah.
And then that became a profession. Learning designers, as they were conceived then, are now being replaced by AI. You know, again, think in terms of producing course content. So before COVID, you know, and still just after COVID, one of the most expensive components in producing an online course was the videography. I mean, I've done work with a number of different providers of online courses, and always in those traditional budgets, 40 to 50% of the budget was the videography for filming the professor or filming the thing, right? That's now not, you know, you don't even need, that's not necessary anymore. You can generate, you know, you can generate a perfectly good video sequence using ChatGPT. And I don't know ChatGPT 5, it's only just been released. But apparently what ChatGPT 5 can already do is magnitudes more than ChatGPT 4. So I think, again, this is going to make visualization much easier. You can now, and I was experimenting with one earlier today, you've now got large language models very effectively that can compose music and compose music from text prompts. So again, if you want background music to your video, you can produce it using a large language model for a very negligent cost. So I think it's going to change the way that this sort of stuff is produced. It's going to be controversial because, of course, there's the question of quality control. We must not rush into this naively because, of course, large language models and AI hallucinates, makes things up, sometimes very creatively, by the way, but they just happen not to be true. And as you discovered doing my biography, it can be highly selective. And according to AI, my whole career as an archaeologist, of which I'm actually quite proud, disappeared. So what happens in that situation is the human in the loop becomes much more of the quality moderator rather than doing the production work. So it's a shift in role thing. So we're going to see that change. And I think if we get it right, it can be very useful to us in increasing the quality of education and the ability of students to construct much more meaningful journeys, you know, through colleges and universities towards the qualifications they need.
I think this connects very well to something you said earlier during this conversation, where there are some things that AI can do very well. There's also things that humans are much better at. And AI would not replace your doctor. It would give your doctor more time with the patients.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's I think that's the challenge, to see how you can use those AI solutions in that way.
Yes, it is. Right? We have to remember that what AI does is basically pattern recognition. So it of course it's and many people on this call will know as much as I do about this. But basically, they are semantic models. They use the structure of language. They work through information using the same logic as the neural pathways of the brain, and then with uncanny accuracy, they predict what comes next from a line of thought, association, and reasoning. That's what they do. They don't in themselves have any emotion. They don't have feelings. They can't make the kind of contextualization that we associate with the right brain, where they put things in their holistic context. Not yet. They can't do that. So that's where the human in the loop is important. But they relieve the human of doing things that are mere pattern recognition. Now, a great example of this, which we haven't mentioned so far, is grading examination papers at scale. Now, anybody again in universities, this is the most mindless task you can imagine. So, you know, you've got a class of 500 students in Sociology 101. We've all been there, right? They write an examination. You know, they've got to do 4 questions in a 3-hour paper. Now suddenly you've got to mark 2,000 answers. All right, and you've got a week to do it, and you're meant to remain fair and objective all the way through. Well, after, you know, an hour and a half in, I don't know about anybody else, I'm brain dead at that point. The idea of fairness and objectivity, I'm irritated profoundly by poor handwriting, and I lose any sense of my own reference for this grading. It's a very, very crude way of assessing things. We already know that AI can do grading at scale much better than humans. And in fact, the CEO of one of the awarding bodies of the A levels in Britain, which are the school leaving examinations in the United Kingdom, is on record as saying the only thing that stops us using AI for grading all of these papers is public perception. So grading, again, is a task that AI will relieve us of, and we are going to also see the opportunity of far more authentic assessment at scale, but only if the design of the AI applications is appropriate and we set appropriate standards for doing it. So that's, again, something that's really going to, I think, change what we do.
Thank you. I'm just having a look at the Q&A chats where Nicole Campbell, who's at the University of Groningen. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for joining. Is asking a question. Let's see. It's a bit long, but I just try to see if I can make it a bit shorter. She's saying that the principal challenge often lies within the broader framework. In essence, are we using AI merely adapting the way in which we utilize the lists provided by organizations such as Nuffic, Actis, and others to determine the level of a document, or is there more to it? So this is quite a specific question about the qualification assessment, and maybe I don't know if you can also see the Q&A chat, Martin, but maybe that's something that you can maybe elaborate on a little bit.
Yes, I've got the question up in front of me. Thanks very much, Nicole. Yes, I think it can. I mean, this is a very good example. Let me relate this back to a question you asked earlier on, and we haven't touched on it, and that's the quality of the prompt engineering. So, you know, it's naive to think that you can just sort of open up an application, ask a question, and get an answer, because you don't. And I think what Nicole's question points out is a very good example of the need for very carefully considered prompt engineering. So there are a number of ways to do this, and I agree with her that just opening up an application and asking a naive question, you know, can you please give me the equivalence of qualifications, you know, full stop, is not going to get you anywhere at all. What you're going to have to do for this sort of application is you're going to have to develop a quite careful and considered prompt that sets out precisely what you want. Now, there are a number of, there's a lot of material out there that helps you to do that. One good place to look, by the way, for easy to use courses on prompt engineering is LinkedIn Learning. And LinkedIn Learning's got a whole pathway on prompt engineering, and 3 or 4 really very good videos for that, including videos that and courses that give examples of prompts. So one of the ways to do this, to answer Nicole's question, would be to develop a sophisticated prompt, which was a standard prompt for asking this question. Now, if a commercial application becomes available, such a prompt will be built into the system engineering of the application itself. But there's nothing to stop the kind of professional that Nicole's got in mind from developing their own set of prompts to ask the precise question that actually conforms to the European practice, for instance, rather than the United States or North American practice. One of the things that you can do in prompt engineering is what is called a one-shot prompt. And what happens in a one-shot prompt is that you enter an example of the output that you want, which is a very good way of doing it. So in other words, you have an ideal description of how it works, you build it in, and you tell GPT to basically replicate that standard in what you want as the outcome. Now, what's happening in the broad world of AI at the moment is that these very clever standard applications like ChatGPT-5 or Gemini 2.5 Pro, which amaze us when we ask them questions, first of all, they are the subject now of very detailed prompt engineering to answer these kind of specific questions. And it all really rests in that design.
Thank you. I've would like to address another question in the Q&A, which is quite a specific one. There's no name attached to the question, but it doesn't matter. So the question is, do we have working and successful examples of using AI in back office? Many IT specialists here hit a wall when they realized that diplomas, transcripts, and certificates don't have international standards, just like passports. So actually a quite practical question about what working and successful examples of using AI in those back office processes do we know?
Yes, first of all, of course, I think what that question means is that with the exception of national awarding bodies, the way that diplomas and degrees are recognized in credentials vary enormously between institutions. Every institution has its own format of doing stuff, and they don't conform to that international standard like a passport. One thing that AI is going to encourage us to do, I think, is to standardize those kind of formats much more than we do at the moment, simply because of this opportunity for automation will remove a lot of that very hard back office labor that we have at the moment. And I mean, just reading that question that came in there, you can get a sense of how difficult and complicated this is. I mean, this is why it can take a couple of weeks for an institution to work out the equivalence of a qualification where you apply to a different institution. So I think that these kind of things, and this is again where a network like the GDN is relevant. As soon as you've got network benefits, then institutions start to surrender their insistence on individuality and begin to see the benefit of a shared format of doing something. And that in itself will help immediately with this kind of standardization. So as soon as you've got that in place, it's going to encourage that sort of equivalence to work out. And I think that's what a lot of the work at the moment I'm thinking about the Digital Credential Consortium, for example, based coming out of MIT, is actually working on to get those kind of standardization protocols in place. AI will not in itself solve the standardization problem. The standardization issue has got to be done so that the language of the data can then be processed using the opportunities of AI.
Well, I think we're going through the questions quite well. There's a lot of them in there, but not all of them are very suitable for the discussion now. And I'm also mindful of the time. So first, I want to thank everybody for sharing your questions. Also, I would encourage people to have a look at the Q&A chat, because there's also some answers from colleagues there that might help you along your own search for solutions or ways of thinking that could help you, which is very much in the GDN spirit. I always feel that, and I'm curious to hear from you, Martin, if you recognize this, that within the field of education and higher education in particular, institutions can be quite protective of their own intellectual property and things like that, and opening up to a network about the solutions you use or the way your processes are working is not always very easy, but clearly has benefits if you take advantage of the knowledge of the network, right?
Yes, although there's an interesting kickback for that one that you've just mentioned there, and that is, while we are, of course, talking very appropriately about networks and participation and sharing, at the same time, when you're using AI, you've got to be very, very careful of your own intellectual property. Because, of course, an AI depends on a training set. And the defining feature of generative AI, as opposed to standard AI, of course, is generative AI is generating its own training set without human intervention at a massive, massive rate. As soon as you put something into a prompt or do an inquiry, unless you are using what really should be called a small language model where it's constrained, but if you're using an application like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, everything you put in goes into their training set, which means it can be discovered by somebody else. Okay. Now, this is very interesting. If you go in and you ask the application to write a report, the thing that I always emphasize is important is you don't take anything for granted. When I generate a research report on Gemini, generating the report takes 5 minutes. I then usually spend a couple of hours taking that thing apart. What I find is that overwhelmingly, particularly in anything to do with academic knowledge, it skims the surface. What I'm finding is that its sources of information are blogs, web posts, and superficial things, because of course, it can't get in to an article that is behind a wall and is protected by a publisher. Now, remember, when you're using these things in your institution or personally, every time you put something into that, unless you're working with a constrained language model, goes into the training set, and that's your IP. So I suppose a late in the day contribution to this discussion we're having now is that you've also got to be very, very careful about your own and your institution's intellectual property when you're getting involved in these kind of networks, not because it's wrong to share them, but because you might, in actual fact, simply be losing your right of identity and attribution when you put it into that general arena.
Yeah, yeah, very, very good cautionary tale there. Before time is up, I just want to make sure that I remind everybody to check out the chat, also the regular chat channel, where there's some relevant information about how to learn more about GDN, etc. But of course, I also have to make sure that I mention that this is a part of a series of webinars. There's more to come. Check out our website. But for instance, the very next one will be on Wednesday, September the 24th, about called Beyond Credit Transfer, Labor Mobility as a Transformational Experience. So this is next week on Wednesday. And after our annual meeting in October, there will be another webinar on November 18th, also about AI in recognition processes, but then practical practices and the ethical and operational insights. So that's could be a very interesting follow-up on the discussion that we're having now. Of course, I have to encourage everybody who has not done so already to make sure and register for our annual meeting in the last week of October in Oslo. If you found this conversation interesting, there is much more to talk about in Oslo, with a multitude of speakers, a 3-day event where I would encourage everybody to come. And if you're not able to be in Oslo, then at least be in Cape Town in 2026, where I hope to meet you, Martin, in person again. I think we are at our time. Is there any last words that you would want to share with the audience, Martin, before we have to leave them?
Look, the thing we're in is that, we often spend a lot of time trying to predict the future and understand where AI is going. And every time I think about what we're doing with AI, I remember some of those famous statements that have been made by figures in the past. I believe in about 2007, the CEO then of Microsoft said, there is no commercial future in the iPhone. Back in the early 1950s, somebody, and I forget who at the moment, said there's not going to be room for more than 5 computers in the world. And the world is littered with predictions of the future. My parting shot is, if anybody asks you what will be the capability of AI in 5 or 10 years' time, don't trust any answer that you're given, because the answer is we do not know.
We have no idea. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin Hall, on these wise words to end this webinar. I think we had a very interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing that on a later date. So thank you so much for your time. I would say to the audience, make sure to tune in for the next part of our conversation series for the GDN network. And I hope to see you all soon in Oslo. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.